So there is this fear. I'm here to tell you, fear not. We need your voices echoing in the chambers of Congress, in the halls of justice. There is no justice without faith-filled people exercising 100% their rights.
South Carolina's Tim Scott has spent 10 years in the U.S. Senate.
We have work to do in Washington, D.C.
Now, he'd like to move to the White House.
Put your left hand on the Bible.
The Bible his mother held that Scott's swearing in was not a prop. She shared it regularly with Tim as he grew up.
And so we started watching TBN, and you had a number of great pastors.
Along with programs right here on TBN.
Those guys were, the behemoths in faith.
We caught up with Senator Scott in a quiet neighborhood near the Capitol, close to his campaign office. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You've had the courage to lead with faith, and that's not always a popular decision in the city of Washington, D.C.
It may be the least popular decision these days, but it's the most effective decision one can make. A, Jesus being the Lord of your life. B, using biblical principles to lead. And C, know that leading is really about following the Lord. One of the things we should do is focus our attention back on something simple like John 8:31 and 32, which says, abide in me, and then you'll know the truth, and it'll set you free. If we did just that, if we just spent time understanding and appreciating the gospel principles that is the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation, and we allowed ourselves to abide in the truth of who we are as Americans, we would A, understand American exceptionalism, B, we'd understand our responsibility, and C, we would take it seriously enough to have another American century.
Absolutely. It takes courage to talk about American exceptionalism right now. Most of the voices I hear apologize for our nation, and you don't.
No way, no way. One of the things I like to debate is, should we cancel our founding fathers or should we celebrate them? These were geniuses. They weren't perfect men. I'm here as an African American telling you, I'm happy we amended the Constitution. But the question is undeniable that these geniuses understood that the power of the written word would be the rudder of the ship for the rest of America's life. Our Declaration of Independence, our birth certificate, says they are inalienable rights. They don't come from the government. They don't come from each other. They come from our Creator.
The First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Yes, sir.
Those have both been curtailed greatly.
Under assault.
Censorship, we've accepted censorship.
On college campuses and our elementary schools and our public forums, if you're a person of faith, the last thing they want to do is give you freedom to experience. One of the things I said in one of my speeches is, those who are tolerant don't tolerate me. It's remarkable. The only thing an African American struggles to be today in America is a conservative. We have literally put a top and pushed down and said, don't you say a word. We're going to tell you what you think. We're not going to teach you how to think. Because if I can get you to be afraid, every other person who looks like you, thinks like you, walks like you, will never put their head above the surface, because they will have learned the lesson. That is dangerous for all of America, when there are people, whether it's because of the color of your skin or because of your gender, because of something else, where your faith-filled experience cannot be expressed in a public forum without you becoming a target.
As I was preparing for today, it occurred to me that you and I, because of the worldview we share, we've both been called a racist.
Exactly right.
Irony in that.
100% there is irony in that. But it's worth the fight if our suffering today produces stronger people tomorrow.
Well, you talked about objective truth. From my vantage point, one of the truths is that the government's primary responsibility, or one of them, is to defend our borders.
100%.
And right now we have an open border, or multiple open borders. And we have sown the wind, and we're going to reap the whirlwind from that. How do we resolve that? Or do we have the will to resolve it?
Well, we need new leadership to solve that, to be honest with you. What we know currently is that the current administration, the vice president has said, our border is secure. 6 million illegal crossings, the worst in American history. Over 100 people on our national security watch list from countries outside of Latin America walking across our southern border. And 70,000 plus Americans have lost their lives to fentanyl being trafficked by Mexican cartels right across our southern border. Every single county in America is a border county. We must close our southern border. I have legislation, and if I was in charge of this country, we would institute very quickly, finish the wall. I put $10 billion in legislation to help get that done. You can use new technology to detect fentanyl. They tell me the Border Patrol agents say for about $5 billion, instead of covering 2% of the border, we could cover over 90% of the border. We should freeze the Mexican cartel's assets so that they cease to exist. We can do that.
You mentioned it earlier, the American exceptionalism, that's been diminished, and then you see it reflected, and we're not even willing to protect either our territory
Yes.
or our military.
Absolutely.
And we've got to restore those things.
And we can do it. The good news is, with a change in leadership, America could have another American century. We need to say to every Christian out there and every pastor out there, the First Amendment was designed to protect you and the church from the government, not the government from the church or believers. We need to say to the American people that the number one priority of the federal government is clear. Article 1, Section 8 enumerates what our responsibility is. National security. Amen. Clear as a bell. Let's just do what our founding fathers wrote in the blueprint on how to restore faith in America.
Well, thank you for the courage to say that, because that message is not being taught in our schools with much frequency. It's certainly not on our college campuses.
No, you're right.
You know, in fact, so much of the messaging that I see and hear does just the opposite. It's creating ways to make victims or confusion. You know, one of the topics that has a lot of play these days is gender confusion, even, you know, the transgender issue.
Transgender ideology is ruining women's sports. What I don't understand is where the fuss is. I asked a question literally in the middle of a foreign relations committee. If we are going to stop discriminating against women in sports, let's make sure that men don't compete against them. The room was silent. It's just too simple common sense. I think sometimes the smallest component part tells you all you need to know. Let's just speak truth. The truth is what it is.
We have compassion on people that struggle with confusion, but we don't want to institutionalize it.
Well, as a matter of fact, one of the things that we should do is make sure that we speak the truth in love, Ephesians 4:15. But we should never confuse love with truth.
And we can't abandon our children to be mutilated and their lives altered. That's Mengele alike. We're going to have the courage to protect our children.
Well, one of the ways that we do that is make sure that you're an adult before you sign a contract. There's no child that can sign a contract. And more importantly, there are too many forces in big labor in education saying that parents do not have the right to know what's happening to their kids. That to me is hogwash. And there are states today that are adopting and embracing not informing the parents on the most important decisions that cannot be reversed. And frankly, as of late, there are young people, 18, 19, and 20, who are coming out and looking back on the decisions that they made with their parents, and they say, don't do it. Let us make a decision when we can sign the contract ourselves. I think that should be embedded in our legal system.
I think one of the benefits of COVID and the pandemic was parents got to look over the shoulders of their children while they were learning.
Yes.
And it exposed this idea that has flourished in too many places, that the teachers' unions or the school systems or the government is responsible for the content that our children are being educated with. We cannot surrender the children.
There are parts of this country that literally want to carve parents out. I was in a state recently who said that their legislators told the parents that anybody can be a parent, but not everybody can be a principal or a teacher. I was like, my mama, poor young lady that she was, cared more about me than any highly educated bureaucrat, any highly educated and highly paid labor union that had more interest in the adults in the system than they do the children in the system. We have to protect our kids. We have to actually know what they're being taught. And unfortunately, in today's education system, too often they are being indoctrinated and not educated. That's why we have so much angst around CRT. We should get back to ABC. If you look at the recent results because of the pandemic, we've exposed the failure of our education system, whereas we've seen the most precipitous drop in scores in American history. Why? Because we're not focusing on the fundamentals. We're not focusing reading, arithmetic, as I said, and writing. We're focusing on ESG, DEI, 100 genders and only one ideology. We are indoctrinating our kids. It's time to get back to educating our kids and teaching American history again. We need to understand who we are and the greatness of who we are. We need to be able to articulate in a sensible fashion why we are the greatest nation on God's green earth, and we should never backpedal when defending who we are as Americans.